And Phil, let's start with the latest fighting north of Kyiv. Ukraine's president says Russian forces are trying to seize the Chernobyl exclusion zone and that Ukrainians are giving their lives to avoid another disaster there. What's the main concern in that area?
Diane, the main concern is the reactor. So he references 1986, obviously the disaster there in Chernobyl, and it's an exclusion zone. And what he's talking about is Russian troops are pushing in. They haven't come that far, but the exclusion zone is just beneath the Belarus border. He says his troops are fighting back. What he is concerned about, Diane, is the fact that, you know, when you're fighting and missiles and rockets and gunfire, you can't be that specific and that accurate. And what he's worried about is that something might miss and hit the reactor. And then that is a problem for more than just Ukraine and part of Russia. It's a problem for Europe.
And Phil, you said you were seeing an extraordinary show of solidarity where you are. What do you mean by that?
Well, Diane, it was emotional and it was heartbreaking. We were at the hotel just down the street from a square in the heart of Lublin, and we heard something. We came outside, a couple hundred people wrapping themselves in the Ukrainian flag, singing Ukrainian songs. Then they were announcing which region they were from. We spoke to some Ukrainians who were speaking English to us, one holding a sign saying that her town was bombed today. She's from the Donbass region. And then we spoke to another woman through a translator. She was using Russian. She was using the language of the country that is attacking hers, crying, holding back tears, struggling through it, telling us that the world needs to see what's going on. The world needs to look at what's happening here in Lublin, Poland, and then go and help her country.
And I want to bring in White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks into this conversation as well, because Mary Alice, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, is warning of potential Russian cyber attacks that could even draw the U.S. and other NATO countries into an Article 5 response, that collective defense provision. So what are you hearing from the administration on that front?
Yeah, for weeks there's been a debate about whether cyber attacks would constitute an attack from Russia, what kind of response a cyber attack would warrant. We saw cyber attacks lobbied by Russia against Ukraine in the weeks leading up to this, and the White House was very careful to say that that wasn't the kind of response that they wanted to count, that they wouldn't be imposing sanctions based on cyber attacks against Ukraine. Of course, now we've crossed this threshold. We have this major military invasion at this point. And so the question becomes, what about cyber attacks now? What about cyber attacks against the U.S.? Domestically, we've heard U.S. officials extremely worried that as a part of this aggressive moment, Russia could target American companies, American infrastructure. Obviously, critical infrastructure in the United States, like electricity and water, is not run by the government. It's run by private companies. So the federal government has been working very closely with private companies to try to make sure that their cyber defenses are up. But like you said, also a big concern on Capitol Hill right now that Russia could lobby cyber attacks against NATO countries, like in Poland, you know, where Phil is. And what kind of response would that warrant? Would that count as an attack on a NATO country? And obviously, under sort of the NATO treaties, Article 5, the crux of the NATO alliance is that an attack on one is an attack on all and would warrant a response from all. So a big debate in Washington right now, big concern about what cyber warfare could look like and what the consequences could be.
And Phil, ABC News is also hearing from a U.S. official that Russia may try to attack Lviv in western Ukraine. What would that mean, especially for a potential refugee crisis?
Well, Diane, that's specifically the reason the U.S. sent about 5,000, now over more than 5,000 troops here to Poland to help the Polish authorities set up on the border for that kind of crisis. Remember, President Putin was over in eastern Ukraine, and a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the thought of him coming through the country all the way over to Lviv was, you know, it wasn't a reality. That's why they moved the embassy, the U.S. embassy, from Kyiv to Lviv. But now his troops are there, and as you said, a source is telling ABC News that he's going to go into Lviv. So what happens is everybody there would have to go, and they can't go. The only direction they can go in is here toward Poland because they're surrounded now by Russian troops, and it would be dangerous. So they're already on their way, many of them, to the border, and they will have to get through the border. And once they get here, Poland needs to decide what to do, and that depends on how many come. It could be tens of thousands. It could be hundreds of thousands. Just depend on how bad it gets, the fighting gets in the western part of Ukraine.
And Mary Alice, how are the U.S. and its allies working to try to help Ukrainians who've been displaced?
Yeah, we know that for weeks, the U.S. government, through USAID and the State Department, has been talking about pre-positioning resources along the border. They've been extremely worried about what exactly Phil is talking about a pending humanitarian crisis, a refugee crisis right there in the middle of Europe. I mean, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people fleeing for their lives. And the U.S. wants to be a part of that response, feels obligated, of course, to help if we're facing such a humanitarian crisis. We also know, of course, we have U.S. troops in the region. President Biden has been moving troops based elsewhere in Europe to that region. Just shy of about 10,000 troops that have moved to Poland and Romania, some of these far eastern NATO countries, with the idea that they would obviously reinforce NATO forces and the militaries of those states, but that they would also be in position to assist with any humanitarian response. And we've heard Ukraine over the last 24 hours really plead for this kind of help, too. They've not only asked for sanctions, they've asked for military assistance, and they've asked for humanitarian assistance.
All right, Mary Alice Parks from D.C., Phil Lipoff from Lublin, Poland, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.